What's up, everybody? It's Molly, and I'm back, and we're talking about podcast hosting, which, by the way, is probably the number one question I get when I teach classes is what is an RSS feed? An RSS feed is the way that your podcast is delivered to the internet, and the way where you get your RSS feed is from a podcast hosting site. What is a podcast host versus iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play? Those iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all those things are podcast aggregators. That means they take your content and they deliver it to their audience. But your podcast host lives on your RSS feed, and that comes from a company like Libsyn or Podbean or a number of other hosting companies that you can choose from. And then you take your RSS feed, and that's what you submit to all the other companies in order for your content to reach the internet. These days, there's a lot of podcast hosts, man. The competition is definitely thick. So it's always good to do your research. Personally, we love Libsyn. They're just really simple to use. They've been around a long time. I don't think they're going out of business, but I mean, there are so many options, so like you really can't pick a bad one. However, here's some things that you should look out for. There is a whole new thing going on in podcast hosting where companies are offering not only hosting, but the opportunity to match you with advertisers and get you some money. The problem is with a lot of these, they're going to use traditional CPM rates, which is like advertising lingo. And in the advertising world, you get a certain dollar amount for every CPM. So typically you would have to get like a lot of views or visibility or spins or whatever you want to call it to make any real money. So in the podcast world, traditional CRM rates are not going to be your best friend. However, when you're looking at monetizing your podcast, you should understand that one podcast spin is worth 1,000 radio spins. So the rates that they're using aren't really going to help you out unless you're doing like one-to-one podcast negotiation or like sponsorship negotiation. So I think it's best to kind of avoid these, but like, hey, if you really just want to like see how much money they can get you, like go for it. Maybe they can line you up with some great advertisers. But just be wary of companies that own your content and can use your content for marketing purposes. That's a personal decision, but it's one that you should be aware of. Some of the most important things to think about with podcast hosting and how to pick a good one is to make sure that you have enough bandwidth so that if your podcast gets picked up and a lot of people are listening to it, that you don't run out of space to host it. Another thing that's really important, unlimited downloads. Don't cap your downloads, because what happens if you go viral overnight? What if Oprah features your podcast on Super Soul Sunday and all these people come to your site and they can't listen to your podcast because you have a cap on downloads? Man, what a blower. Another important thing to think about when you're picking a host is make sure that they automatically distribute your content to all the key players, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, etc. If they don't do this automatically, you might want to reconsider. It's also really important that your podcast hosts provide an embeddable player so that you can put your content on other people's websites, on your own website, and any other place that you can embed content. So in short, there are a lot of options for you to choose when picking a podcast host. The most important thing to consider for a lot of people is price. Just keep in mind that if you pick a free podcast hosting supplier, they're probably going to limit your bandwidth and your downloads. So be really, really careful and make sure you choose carefully. Even the best podcast hosting site should be around $15 a month. So it's not a huge investment, but it's one you want to choose carefully. Now, most of these podcast hosting sites allow you to transfer your content pretty seamlessly, but there's always headaches and hiccups. So you really want to try to pick a podcast host that's going to work for you for the long term and not try to pick one that's cheaper now and then upgrade later when you get more views or downloads. Have some faith in your content, man. Like, go big or go home. Like, get something that's going to stand the test of time, that's going to be sustainable with your growth, and that you're going to be happy with it. So that's it. Podcast hosting. Now go out there and pick a good one.